Welcome to Connected Learning TV. I'm Craig Watkins from the University of Texas at Austin, and I'll be moderating slash hosting today's very intriguing conversation. Our guest speaker today is Rafi Santo, and the title of his talk or presentation in our conversation today is Hacker Literacies, Why You Should Know How to Revise and Reconfigure Technology. And so this talk will be an interesting kind of provocative conversation just around what it means to be a hacker today, what a hacker identity is, but more importantly, how do we begin to understand hacking as a particular form and practice of literacy. So this is, just for those of you who may be new to Connected Learning TV, the 21st webinar in the series, and this is something that began a little over, I guess, about not quite a year or so ago, but it's an interesting way in which the Connected Learning Research Network and the DML Hub it just continues to keep the conversation around connected learning, around digital media, youth, and culture kind of alive and well, and sort of building and growing out our wonderful community. So if you're interested, you can follow today's webinar after we finish today on our webinar page at connectedlearning.tv. For a full recording. We'll also list out all the questions that were asked today, a list of the resources that were mentioned, and archive the live stream chat as well. And we welcome you to continue today's conversation on that page as well through the Twitter hashtag Connected Learning. Let me also say that on Thursday, our next session will be at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and that'll be with Connie Yao from the MacArthur Foundation, and she will be discussing reimagining the experience of education in the digital age. So just a little bit about our speaker today, and then we will open it up and let our Google Hangout friends and visitors introduce themselves and maybe say a little bit of something about what it is about today's topic that they're particularly intrigued about and what they hope to get out of our conversation today. So Rafi is a researcher, educator, and activist currently pursuing a doctorate in learning sciences at Indiana University. His current work involves using ethnographic approaches to understanding diffusion of learning innovations in the digital media and learning field, promoting systems thinking through digital design and creating coordinated linkages between formal and informal learning environments. So again, Rafi, we're looking forward to your thoughts today and the conversation that your thoughts will help frame and shape today. Before we get started, as is customary here, we'd like to invite our friends who've joined us in the Hangout just to introduce themselves by name, maybe a little bit about your background, and if there's anything in particular that interests or intrigues you about our topic today, please feel free to go ahead and share that either via a question or just a brief comment or observation. So perhaps we can start with Chad.
Sure, thanks. I'm Chad Sansing. I teach humanities at the Community Public Charter School, which is a small literacy-focused, arts-infused charter school for non-traditional middle school learners in Virginia for Albemarle County. I'm especially interested in helping kids and teachers both approach school, approach curricula as things to be hacked, as things to be remade, both digitally and with material artifacts, in ways that kind of get the standardization out of the classroom and really make the education as useful as possible to students and fulfilling for both the adults and the kids in our schools.
Great, thanks, Chad. Andrew?
Sure. My name is Andrew Schrock. I'm a USC Annenberg student, PhD student. I guess hacking and hackerspace is a research interest of mine, particularly from kind of community and organizational perspectives. But then also at USC Annenberg, I'm part of the Innovation Lab, where I'm helping basically to bring a lot of the ideas that Rafi is talking about into a higher ed kind of framework. So that's sort of a little bit about myself and what brings me here today.
Okay, great. How about you, Aaron?
So I'm Erin Knight, and I'm the Senior Director of Learning at Mozilla Foundation. And I don't even know where to start, where this stuff interests me, but I'll start with an initiative that Mozilla is doing right now called the Webmaker Initiative, which is trying to build a generation of web makers. And so think Rafi and I have talked about this before. Web making, web literacy is kind of one version or one subset of what we talk about with hacker literacies, which I'm sure we'll get into today. But really moving this generation or upcoming generations from what one of our board directors calls elegant consumption to production, and to really having the tools to be able to change things, build things, edit things, or hack things. And I think it actually applies to both things on the web, but kind of everything that we encounter in life. So it's very exciting.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aaron.
I'm Doug. Oh, sorry, is Chris trying to talk then? Chris hasn't got his microphone on.
Chris, are you mute?
I'm on now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Chris Lawrence. I'm the director of the Hive Learning Network in New York City, part of the Digital Media and Learning portfolio, as well as being a project within Mozilla Foundation. I'm really interested in this topic, one, because I think it really starts to make more clear this sort of convergence of a variety of literacies that I think that are being leveraged, but also need to be updated or in some way remixed. So I'm really interested in new ways to think about that. And then two, as director of Hive Learning Network in New York City, which is 40 youth organizations working together, we're really building programs that we think kind of treat Rafi's work more as a manifesto than an academic paper. And how do we, get programs that sort of are driven by the hacker literacies ethos, so to speak. So I'm really interested in this as a practical level as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
My turn now. Excellent. I'm Doug Belshaw. I'm also from Mozilla Foundation. I'm Badges and Skills Lead, so I'm working on web literacies and also on open badges over here in the UK. I'm based up in the northeast of England. I did my thesis on digital literacies, so it's kind of my research area, and I've been very impressed with Rafi's work, and I saw him present at the DML conference in San Francisco earlier this year. And not only his timing for the slides, which were kind of auto-advanced every 15-20 seconds, but also the content of what he was talking about in the paper, which I've read several times afterwards, really kind of inspired me. So I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, great. So this is, as you can see, a wonderful hangout that we have here, and really just inspiring in terms of just the community that we've gathered, and really looking forward to our conversation. So Rafi, you want to take a few minutes just to perhaps really get the ball rolling here, and maybe give us some additional insight in terms of how you think about hacker literacies and why you see this as an important practice, an important type of literacy that we should be developing, supporting, and enhancing young people's ability to participate in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Craig, and thanks everyone for joining, all the folks on the hangout and also the folks that are listening. So obviously I don't assume that everyone kind of is familiar with what these ideas are, but really there's very little that's new about them, is what I'll say at the start. And Chris mentioned something very interesting when he introduced himself, which is that this is kind of a little bit of pulling together a number of different threads. And so I'll offer a very brief kind of description of what I see hacker literacies as being about. And then I want to offer a little bit of a story that guided my thinking about basically how these are existing in practice, how hacker literacies are existing currently in the lives of today's youth, and also kind of how it pulls together a couple of those threads. So to start with, I would say, to me, being a hacker and being hacker literate is largely about not taking for granted the design of the technology that's around us. We live in a world where technology is ubiquitous, and it's only becoming more so. And it's very easy to just assume that it happened to be there, kind of in a way that a lot of people assume that roads or electricity happen to be there. Now, these are very specific cultural and historical processes that led to the technologies that we have today. And what's most important for me about hacker literacies is understanding that the technologies we use is always laden in values. It's always driven by somebody's either kind of implicit or explicit ideas about how people should be using it and how people should be interacting socially. And really, it's about understanding then that technology is malleable. And this is the part that is, I think, often hard for people, especially when we get into habits of use of technology that starts to assume that it's static. And the fact that technology is malleable, that it's changeable, that it's hackable, is something that shouldn't be lost on us. So in a lot of senses, that's the essence of hacker literacy. There's a lot more to say about it, but I want to just pivot to kind of bring life a little bit to this idea a bit more clearly. So before I started my doctoral work at Indiana University, I worked at a fantastic organization called Global Kids, which a lot of folks in this community might be familiar with, and specifically with the incredible leadership that Barry Joseph has displayed over there in that organization. We did a lot of great innovative youth development programs with an orientation towards civic engagement and global empowerment, global youth civic engagement, essentially. And one of the things we started working on was doing programs in the teen grid of Second Life. And I don't know how many folks are familiar with Second Life, but it's a 3D virtual world. It kind of peaked largely in 2006, 2007, 2008. And it's essentially kind of a 3D space where the users are able to create an enormous amount of content using 3D modeling tools and scripting language, and really an incredible space for participatory culture. And yeah, Doug says high-res Minecraft, and possibly slightly less user-friendly. But one of the things that we did at Global Kids was we saw this as a fantastic potential space to do educational programs, partly because they create, Linden Lab, the people that ran Second Life, created a whole teen grid that was just 13 to 17-year-olds. And Global Kids was the first organization to set up a little island. That's kind of the spaces that you'd get in Second Life. We set up an island to run youth development programs within Teen Second Life. And I don't want to talk about those programs, actually, but about a particular youth that I met and worked with a lot when I was there. And this youth online name was Alex Harbinger. And Alex is what I would call, one of those kids that you meet them and you're immediately amazed that, when they're 16, they're doing things that you can only imagine doing at 30. And Alex was an entrepreneur, and he created an enormous amount of in-world business. He had 4 or 5 businesses going at any one time. He had his own islands. He had tenants, and he had products that he was selling, and incredibly successful. But Alex was also just the spearhead of a larger youth community there that was about creating content and about creativity. And there was a kind of while we were there, we started to see that there was a lot of rumblings about the separation between the grids of Second Life. That there was this teen grid where just kind of like balkanized space where the teens could go, and then the adult spaces which is where what the teens saw as the more dynamic, more interesting, and also much larger space. The teen grid was quite small, maybe a couple of thousand active users, whereas the main grid, at more on the order of millions. And so a lot of what happened was that there started to be a bit of a movement to have connections between the teen grid and the main grid. And Alex, rather than kind of just taking these or a lot of well-merited complaints, he kind of parlayed them into an actual youth activism movement within the teen grid. And he held debates on Global Kids Island about what he called kind of grid unification and creating a bridge between the 2 grids. And he held a protest march that ran all across the teen grid, this virtual protest march with hundreds and hundreds of kids participating. They had signs, they had slogans, and really, really impressively, he wrote a 25-page manifesto, what he called his grid unification proposal, of how he saw this process of creating a bridge between these 2 spaces happening, and even had a whole section on frequently asked questions, legal issues, heading off a number of issues that people had raised at the pass. And a number of years, while there was no near-term success for that movement, there was in the long term. The teen grid did eventually get merged into the main grid. And I also happen to know that because we were in close contact with Linden Lab, that Alex's manifesto for grid unification actually hung in their offices over at Linden Lab, deeply influenced conversations that they were having about how to formulate these spaces and how to deal with some of these issues that were raised by the young people there. And so, as I tried at the time, this is probably 2008, as I tried at the time to understand what was happening in this movement, the first thing that naturally came to mind for me working for a youth civic engagement organization was that this is an incredible example of 21st century activism, right? Especially on the youth emerging from a youth culture. And this was a really natural place to go, and it made a lot of sense, and it definitely was an example of youth activism. But at the time, I was also doing a lot of work, and our organization was also doing a lot of work with Henry Jenkins' white paper that had come out in 2006 called Confronting the Challenges of Participatory Culture, Media Education in the 21st Century, where he kind of argued that we needed to move media education from kind of a focus on broadcast media and maybe critical analysis of broadcast media into a whole new area of social skills and cultural practices that are encapsulated in participatory culture, and focus on the gaps where people don't have access to this cultural competencies and social skills. Stuff like how do you find information online, how do you evaluate it, how do you circulate it, how do you engage in kind of acts of collective intelligence. And so I started to actually look at what was happening with Alex and the Teen Grid from the perspective of kind of new media literacies. He was doing an incredible amount of work to synthesize information from this broad community, to distribute it within the community, to mobilize people using blogs and social networks. And so I started to see it as kind of this act of new media literacies. And really what I was starting to see was like, okay, so neither of these, just viewing it as civic engagement wasn't kind of doing it for me. And just viewing it as new media literacies was also not quite sufficient. Really what was totally unique here for me, and what I've started to see in lots and lots of other places, was that this was about reformulating a platform. It was using new media literacies and the social skills and cultural competencies around new media, and combining those with really something very old in relation to media literacy, kind of the classic critical media literacy lens, which is to traditionally look at something like a commercial and ask, who made this? What are the values embedded in it? Whose voice isn't represented? What kinds of power relations in society are reproduced through this piece of broadcast media? And it was kind of taking that critical lens, but then applying it rather than to a message, to a medium itself, to a participatory platform, asking, okay, what values does this participatory platform, in this case Second Life, embody? And do those line up with what I care about in the world? And if they don't, how can I use the tools at my disposal? Things like Henry's team's new media literacies and kind of civic modes of engagement to change the way that platform is formulated. And so for me, this, like Chris alluded to, this was really weaving together a lot of the strands and values that we see really pervading the broader digital media and learning community, and kind of putting them in relation to one another in this really unique way. And I think I've seen it, again and again since then. In the uprising against Facebook in 2010 and ongoing against their privacy changes, and Facebook having to kind of change their practices as a result of people deciding that the platform wasn't happening the way that they wanted it to, and even things like the invention of the hashtag on Twitter, where one man who didn't work for Twitter basically saw a gap in the way the platform worked and decided, like, okay, I see a solution to create more kind of collaborative conversation and archiving and categorization on Twitter. So this is something I see popping up again and again, and I see as being something that we need to pay attention to as educators in this kind of new landscape of participatory culture and participatory learning. So I want to open up the conversation now and maybe kick it back to Craig and kind of have this serve as a platform for us to have a broader conversation. Craig, I think you're still muted.
Okay. I do that all the time. I'm not sure why. Thank you, Rafi, for that great introduction and really a wonderful story and example, sort of looking at how one young student really put into practice a lot of what you and others here, I think, are intrigued about, and that is thinking about the ways in which young people not only passively use technologies, but also begin to actively use them and really think about what those platforms mean and how they can be changed, transformed to, in some ways, convey and reproduce the values that, that particular communities might be invested in. So that, I think, was a wonderful way to really give some concrete kind of materiality to what we might talk about here. What I'd like to do is certainly open this up to the larger hangout, and maybe we can use this question as a way just to kind of get the conversation rolling. So I think most of us gathered here are more than sympathetic to the views that have been expressed, see a lot of potential and value in hacker literacies. But I think we would all agree that there are those who might look at this with, let's say, a bit of suspicion. And so the question that I'd like to pose to Rafi and the Hangout as well is why hacking? In other words, given that there is such an intense battle to get digital learning to be a priority in both our formal, particularly our formal learning environments, schools, for example, and elsewhere, why associate digital learning and digital literacy with what many might regard as a form of transgressive behavior?
Yeah, I think that there is something really risky about using that word, but I also think that sometimes the educational system is a little bit afraid of risk and risk averse, and there's something to be said for, first of all, reclaiming a word that really originally was about a notion of exploration and tinkering, and really when something didn't work the way you wanted it to, just kind of making it work the way you wanted it to through ingenuity and through creativity.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'll jump in for a second. One of the things I think about with participatory media is how schools, as kind of their own medium, seek to limit students' participation to what I consider to be a very small set of print-based kind of skills in terms of relating with the world or the world as it's presented to them. And so I really try to think about school as a participatory medium, and how would that look if it was wide open. I'm a huge fan of programs like Hive New York City that really position powerful learning outside of school, all over the place, because that's where it happens. And bringing kids and organizations together is really important, especially for students who kind of live in that quality of work gap at school, where what they're asked to do at school isn't of a quality or nature to really engage them. But I do think inside schools, much more needs to be done with hacking, because with the standardization of education, not just students, but I think teachers are really losing any kind of DIY maker ethos that they might have once felt empowered to have. I think it's more often the case we feel opposed to or complicit with delivering something that maybe we wouldn't have designed or our kids wouldn't have designed, but we do that because that's the job, that's where the pressures are. And so following kind of Mozilla, the drumbeat community's lead in Mozilla with its work with kids and hack jams, and working with the National Writing Project, I and others have been able to do kind of hack jams for teachers, where we sit down with a group, whether it's at we did one at ISTE when I was in Philadelphia. I've done a few at the local writing project. We sit down and we talk about it as a hack jam, which does trigger all these responses in teachers. But we start with material culture. We start with playing a well-known game together. We start with hacking that game, and we just start talking about like how good it felt to change something so that it became fun and engaging and participatory for everyone. And then once teachers have had that experience in a room together, you can just ask very few questions, and they will start talking about how great it would be if kids had these experiences in their classrooms. And so I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but what I want to say is looking at school as a medium for hacking I think is something that's very important. And I think when teachers have a chance to kind of unpack that term and to get away from kind of black hat and malicious uses for it, they see the position that they and their students are in standardized education, and they start to have all kinds of ideas, not necessarily about what to deliver instead of standardization, but how to work with their students and negotiating new ways to work in the classroom, new ways to learn, or at least ways that aren't valued right now where they are.
Erin, I think you were going to jump in.
Yep. Yeah, so I think two things. So one, I think that as both Rafi said and Chad said, like it is a semantic thing. Like it is about taking back a word. And I think we're making some progress because we are starting to work with the State Department to run hack jams. And if the U.S. State Department loves hack jams, like that we're getting somewhere. But I think it's an important word, or at least that word or some synonym, because it is trying to convey like something beyond just how we usually talk about digital literacy. So it's not just about knowing how to use technologies, but it's really about like being able to control them, or to be able to change them and to use them as like vehicles to do the things that you want to do. And people understand that as hacking, and when you kind of use that word, you kind of cut through some of the sort of initial, traditional kind of thinking and kind of get to that beyond. And exactly the stuff that Craig said, where a lot of the times when we have events with people, we use hack with everything. We're like, let's hack the curriculum, let's hack this game, let's hack the dance, and it is just something that people really do respond pretty well to. And once they get that experience, suddenly it's like opening up a whole new world to how a way of looking at things. So not just specifically about a particular technology, but just a way of looking at life, about how nothing is, is completely like impenetrable, and that you can always change things. So I think it's an important word, and whether or not like it ends up being exactly the word that like we use all the time, I think it's really important at this stage. And again, I think we are making some headway on taking it back.
Chris?
Chris here. Yes, thanks, Craig. I also, a little bit of transgression, a little bit of danger, a little bit of, risk isn't a bad thing, especially when we talk about youth engagement. So I think that there's a certain flair to the idea and identity of hacker that can be a really smart and creative in how you deal with youth and engage them on things where if you described it in more scientific or semantic terms might just seem as off-putting as open your textbook to page 39. So I think that's an exciting part of this too. Not only is buying back the word, but it's also respecting that the word has a little bit of rebellious quality to it. Now, we're not talking about hacking, Chase Bank, but certainly some of our best engineers of the last 75 years would have seen nothing wrong with taking a hammer to a brand new transistor radio. And so, I think there's a bit of a spirit in that it's great to interject back into formal and informal ed. And I also have a great video of a hack the dance that we just did last week, so maybe I could grab that YouTube link and share it around.
Yeah, and I also think that the word hacking is very historically situated as well, and I think that's sort of where some of the power comes from. I mean, there's sort of this interesting thing that happens with hacking where you can see technology as both deterministic, but then also infinitely malleable. And so I think that's where you start to get to some of the ideas of the links between participatory cultures and self-efficacy, or the ability to foresee that your actions can have positive outcomes. And I think Rafi, in one of the pieces that he wrote, linked the idea of hacker literacies to actions of users on Facebook is basically a way to monitor or curtail the actions of a larger system. So I think that's what kind of gets me excited about it, and that's why I think, I don't know, as much as I think sort of the struggle around the term is actually really helpful in a way.
Well, I definitely agree with that. This is Doug. So it seems to everyone has different contexts, and the way that the term and how it's used depends on the context hugely. So over here in the UK, for example, we've got a very right-wing government. You tend to have quite right-wing governments in America as well. And so as much as they're pushing really, really hard to the right, for example, using kind of the term hacker to reconfigure society, to say what is the type of society that we want, what do we want education to look like, is a really empowering thing. And that's what I think came across from what Rafi's done, certainly in his paper when he was talking about in the DML conference, but also what Chad's been saying about what he's been up to in his classroom and what he's been doing with the people in his area as well. So I think without wanting to bring kind of Hegel into this too much as you kind of go with one thing, the one thesis on one side, put one person pushing or one group pushing really hard one way, if we push as hard as we can the other way, then any kind of synthesis ends up being a lot more center ground than it does quite far to the right. And at least that's my take on it.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that strikes me, Rafi, about your comments, and certainly I think others here in Hangout as well, is it seems like we are at an interesting moment when we begin to think about youth and digital media, when we begin to think about participatory culture. And you know, there's this idea, right, of helping young people, and in many respects, young people are doing this on their own, sort of developing these kinds of designer dispositions, which oftentimes reflect this kind of critical orientation where they see themselves in some very unique ways in relationship to the world around them, the information landscape around them. And it seems that as we begin to think about hacking and hacker literacies, that it is in some ways an opportunity to kind of leverage and empower the kinds of critical inclinations that young people are developing in many respects outside of any kind of formal guidance or learning institutions. And so to what extent do you see, and this is to the Hangout in general, to what extent do you see hacker literacies and the extent to which we can help promote and reproduce them, an opportunity to help young people really develop this kind of critical engagement in the world around them?
So I'm happy to have anyone else jump in. You know, one thing that I think is really powerful, like as you said, Craig, this is stuff that kids are already doing. I think the really important piece and role that adults have to play in this process is to help them see that they're doing it. And Henry Jenkins talks about this wonderfully when he talks about the transparency problem around new literacies. And you know, this is not a problem that's limited to what he was talking about in his white paper on new media literacies, but in general, youth are often engaged in practices and activities that are representative of broader ways of engaging in the world without even realizing it. And I think adults can help them to see, like, hey, actually, did you realize that, like, you are doing that here, and also you can do that there? Because once they have a name for it, I think names are really powerful for kids, especially around, you know, think about the moment that, you know, I imagine many folks have when they start to realize that they have skills. You know, they have, you know, this kind of like whole notion of like, oh, that's a marketable skill. You know, the notion that you actually have assets and strengths. When you're able to name them, you're both able to, first of all, form identities around them, which are really powerful, but then also see new contexts for their application. And so I think adults have a lot to offer in terms of letting kids see where they're engaging in these kinds of practices and allowing them to think about how to apply them in other contexts. It's really what ultimately for me, you know, hacker literacies is great. If it ends at the door of technology, though, I think, you know, the technology with a, you know, a lowercase t, then we're in trouble. Because really what it's about is about a disposition towards engaging in the world and seeing the world as a space that is malleable. And if we don't have that position to see the world as a space that's malleable, you know, we're definitely in trouble. And so, you know, getting to that kind of transfer to me is really important, and I think adults can help with that.
Yeah, that's great. So we have, we may have already addressed this a little bit, but we do have a question that has come in from the live stream, so I'll go ahead and share it. Anyone feel free to respond or add to anything that may have been noted previously. And so here's the question. Is the term hacker that important, or are the inherent skills the important aspect?
Well, this is a perpetual debate, isn't it, between and this, I think what Rafi's talking about earlier about naming. Names are really powerful. So the example I've just been putting in the chat, which I realize the rest of the live stream can't see, is that I used to teach history, and so there's some stuff we do in history, for example, that kids would do in maths, like drawing timelines and counting backwards, BC and all that kind of stuff. And stuff kids could do in maths that they couldn't do the next lesson in history. But as soon as you use the name which was used in maths, the actual word which described the thing that they did, they could do it straight away. So yes, the concepts are important behind it, but sometimes the names are really important too, because like has already been discussed, there's a whole history to that term. And as soon as you decide that you can jettison the term itself, you lose all that nuance and you lose all that history and all that rich tapestry.
Great.
I would add a little, one of the things that I try to talk about with adults and also with kids when we are talking about hacking or about negotiating the curriculum or anything where we're trying to connect just the kids' learning with maybe the order of the day in so much as we have to do it, is permissioning and creating spaces of permission. And so for me, I think hacking and with everything that it can mean in terms of making, I think it's a great term for self-permissioning. And I think that is sometimes what's really missing in an environment like a school. Kids don't necessarily feel, and I don't think adults necessarily feel, like they have permission to change things. And I think if they approach something as, hacking or that skill set, making, creating, changing, breaking to see how it works, there's a lot of positive self-starting, goal-setting, achieving. I just think there's a ton of positive learning that comes out of having permission to challenge, to take apart, to change, to remake. And so I like the term because it has for me inside of it that idea of permissioning, and the idea that you can give yourself permission to make things better around you, whether it's your work at school or at home or your neighborhood or a problem you see that you want to tackle anywhere else.
Yeah. And I think what's really important too is that not just that kids have permission to do this, but that they're positioned to do this. That there's always a flip side to the kind of the structure and agency debate, right? It's great to empower kids, but we can, empowerment is a thing that you can't do. You can't empower somebody. You can put people in positions where they have access to power, and I think that's something that's a really important part of this conversation, which is to both think about, what are the kind of skills, dispositions, practices that we care about, but then also what are the ways that we create contexts and learning environments that position kids so that they can do those things. Because I'm sure, like Chad, in your work, you can probably be see how the system that kind of the kids are often working in doesn't really do a lot of work to position them to try to hack the curriculum, for instance. So that it's a two sides to the coin for sure.
And I would say, going back to the original question, is exactly that. Like, the skills are important to understand exactly what those skills are, how we're going to teach those, making sure those get through for that positioning piece, like really giving kids the tool set they need to be able to do this. And I think what everybody else is saying in different iterations is like the word itself is important for kind of the identity and the sort of roles and the just kind of understanding their place in a bigger ecosystem as well. So I would say that both are important, but definitely the skills for that positioning piece.
So Rafi, I'm curious, do you see how do you position yourself kind of in this space? So I know, for example, your doctoral student, is your sort of entry into this conversation in this space, is it primarily as a researcher and or someone who's trying to help create spaces where young people can be put in positions to develop these kinds of hacker literacies? So is it from a kind of design position perspective that you enter this conversation? I'm just curious if you could elaborate a bit more just in terms of your own particular kind of professional and or personal investment in how we think about hacker literacies.
Sure. So I'll say that for me, I certainly didn't come into these ideas from a research perspective. A lot of this was very much grounded in both my direct work with kids and in my direct engagement with in participatory culture myself, as being somebody who's part of that system. I would say that I was really fortunate, and I think for folks that have this sort of disposition, I was fortunate to be able to take some time to go to grad school and spend time in a context that allowed me to kind of formulate a lot of what was bubbling below the surface, what I was seeing when I was doing practice on the ground, but also in particular the kind of program that I'm in right now, a learning sciences program, is very focused on design, very focused on actually making things for kids, designing learning environments, testing them out, refining them, and I really like to be able to be in both of those spaces, because I think to me theory is really powerful, but the reason that it's powerful is that it's a tool that we can use to design the world more effectively. The academic debates around theory stop being of interest to me once they become detached from the work in any real way. And so trying to continue to find ways to put this into practice to me is really important. A lot of the work that I've been doing the design work I've been doing hasn't been explicitly around trying to teach hacker literacies, but as often I do a lot of work, like you had said in the introduction, around systems thinking. And I think systems thinking is really a huge area. If we teach kids to see the world as a series of systems, and to teach them the ways to understand their own position within those and their own agency within them, understanding leverage points, understanding what are the unintended consequences of starting to tinker in systems, it's very much in line with hacker literacies. And that's a lot of where my kind of design effort goes. But more broadly, I'm very interested in kind of how the field is taking shape, yeah.
Great. Would others like to respond? I mean, just maybe share a bit with us. And I think a couple of you have. I think Chris, you alluded to something that may have just happened last week, but maybe others in the Hangout can talk a bit about kind of your position, where you are, your organization, and to what extent your work either promotes, leverages, or helps to position young people to develop these kinds of literacies. Or no?
I can jump in real quick and give others a few seconds to gather their thoughts. So one, with the Hive Learning Network, we're really trying to get organizations to deal and work with youth to think this way themselves, not only about whether it's hack their own curriculum or their own content, and then build programs that empower, or sorry, Rafi, that help to activate the power within the youth to think about that themselves in those contexts. So, and so one of the most effective ways that we've really stumbled upon on how to do that is to run, sometimes we call them hack jams or learning parties or Hive pop-ups, and that we basically constructing very low, bar entry and very low stakes ways in which they can experiment with these kinds of activities, and then start to build up a process in which this really can be a system or a philosophy in which to kind of go about life. And I really like what Chad said, whether it's, it's hack the community, it's hack your government. I think it's such an empowering ethos in which to help kids frame the way that they're going to become, participants in any way that you construct that. So, whether if that's busting up a transistor radio or using Hackosaurus X-ray goggles to quickly see behind a web page and delete the cover photo from the New York Times, at least on their own computer, those kind of aha moments, which are not that hard to capture and to help co-produce for youth, really can be transformative in a very quick and dirty way, and then you can scaffold programs out from that. So those are some of just the dirty on-the-ground ways in which we've both tried to use it as a metaphor and actually put those practices into activities that youth can do, and then start to do on their own and think about all of their sort of trajectory through life with that kind of frame.
Earlier today, I've been looking at computational thinking because I'm doing the web literacies stuff for Mozilla. And I've been trying to think about the relationship between web literacies and digital literacies, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that, you know, if you drew a little circle or two circles, that pretty much, well, web literacies resides entirely within a larger circle of digital literacies. But it seems to me, from what Rafi's been saying, from what Chris has been saying, and from other people have been saying, that if you had those two circles for hacker literacies and for digital literacies, that actually part of the circle for hacker literacies would appear outside of the circle, if you see what I mean, more like a Venn diagram of the circle of digital literacies. And I just wondered what Rafi and other people's thoughts were on that.
I think this is somewhat connected to maybe what I think maybe Aaron alluded to this earlier, which is that we don't really. I think there was really a long time where we saw digital literacy as being just about how do we use technology, and not very much about how do we either make or redesign technology. And I think, you know, the computational literacy movement actually is has a great overlap additionally with hacker literacies, in that it really is valuing production in a huge way. It's it's explicitly about coding and programming and creating new kinds of technology tools. And I think there's a lot of overlap between just general kind of maker dispositions and hacker dispositions. I think what's kind of the distinction that I would make is that hacker literacy is really aimed at looking at existing technologies and asking whether they line up with our values, and that can lead to the creation of new technologies, but it doesn't necessitate that. And it's actually a question that I wanted to throw over maybe towards Aaron and also maybe you, Doug. Is I'm about to go out again.
Your mute's on.
I am sorry. So I think we may have lost Rafi again. Unfortunately, his technology has been just kind of coming in and out, but I'm sure he'll be back on. So we'll go ahead and continue until he returns. I think he's trying to do that. Are you back now, Rafi?
I am. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on with my browser today. But what I was gonna ask, I've sufficiently given enough prep time to Aaron and Doug. But one thing that I think is a really interesting tension for me as I've thought about these ideas is what the relationship is between kind of technological competencies and social competencies. And Doug, I feel like the work that came out of the web literacies diagrams and visualizations speaks to some of that. But I'm wondering, from Mozilla's perspective, as people that are an organization and really a movement that's about promoting web making, how do you think about the balance between a kid needing to know a specific HTML tag and this kind of broader understanding of technology's malleability, and what the relationship between those two levels is for you guys?
So that sounds like a question for Evan.
I'm happy to jump in and pass it right back to Doug. No, I mean, I think at the core we think they're both very critical and intertwined. So it's kind of the one controversial way of saying is like the hard and the soft skills, but it's like it's both, specifically what do you need, as you were talking about before, what do you need to position yourself to be able to actually go hack or change or edit technology, but it's also about these kind of broader things like collaboration, like etiquette, sharing, like all of this kind of sort of broader ways of thinking, of learning, of approaching things that we think is at an equal level. And you'll see, so Doug has been working on the initial sort of set of web literacy skills, and you'll see that there's a balance. In fact, they're originally color-coded for sort of technical skills versus sort of some of the more social skills, and it was minority were the sort of technical skills, and more were the sort of broader set. Now, if you look at what we've actually rolled out, we've started really with some of the more technical skills. With the WebMaker initiative I mentioned before, we have released a tool called Thimble, and it basically is a two-pane editor, and you see the HTML and CSS on the left, and then there's like a learning project or a challenge or game on the right. And so you complete the game by actually editing the HTML. And so it's kind of a, it's a deep dive into the sort of more harder skills, or a few of those harder skills, but in reality, you have to start somewhere. And we fully intend to very quickly layer on a lot more of the sort of the bigger the social skills, the more broad-reaching stuff as we go. So yeah.
Yeah. So what I was saying there about the link between skills and literacies, to my mind, it's very closely linked to what Rafi was saying about empowering people. Like, you can't force people to be empowered. You can't force people to be literate. You can give them the tools. You can equip them with the skills. But the literacy kind of emerges from the meta-reflection on the skills, if you see what I mean. You have to be aware that you're literate. Otherwise, you're not really literate. And I know that sounds a bit paradoxical, but if you think it through, it kind of makes sense. So when we at Mozilla are providing tools and kind of helping people come with their skills, what we need to do is kind of help people reflect on their practices, on their skills, to the extent that they can then become literate. And that's the really difficult part. So, for example, part of the grid that Evan referred to earlier, that Michelle Levesque did originally, was very much influenced by Howard Rheingold's stuff when he was talking about crap detection. So crap detection is when it's like the classic media literacy thing that Rafi introduced right at the start, where you see something online and you know that it's not true, like the tree octopus thing. You know it's not true, but how do you know it's not true? Well, there's tools and techniques we can teach you to be able to do that, but we can't teach you every single case because it would just take forever, wouldn't it? So you have to have that kind of built-in crap detector. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have to be immersed in the web. So it's something which is kind of emergent and something which has this kind of meta-reflection. So some of this stuff has to emerge from the learner, that it is predicated upon tool use and is predicated upon developing skills. But it's really, really difficult to teach. So it's the same, for example, I've got a 5-year-old son who you might be able to hear in the background with my 18-month-old daughter. He's becoming literate at the moment, but there will never be a day when I say, and now you are now literate, son. And it's kind of like that with other literacies as well, as far as I can see.
Yeah. So we have another question from the live stream, and in some ways it's related to something that just popped up on our chat menu here. And one of the things that connected learning that we continue to be interested in is how do these issues relate to questions of equity in the digital world, and how do we create a broader, more inclusive, democratic space for a greater diversity of young people to develop these kinds of literacies, these kinds of practices, these kinds of dispositions that we've alluded to here. But from the live stream, which I think in some ways connects with this matter, goes something like this. And this is, I think this is based on the example, Rafi, that you gave of Albert in Second Life. And so here's the question: what about the kid in Second Life? What gave him permission, assuming it was a him or her, the permission to achieve or move beyond the existing system? And was it any one thing in particular? From whence did this empowerment arise, or was it embedded in the tool?
I think in the case of Second Life, there was a lot. It made itself very transparent as a shifting ecosystem, as a shifting socio-technical space, because of the presence of the Linden Lab employees on the grid. They were constantly having community meetings. They were, and constantly changing the way the platform worked based on user feedback. This is actually one of the things that is to me kind of heartening about the current technological world we live in, is that in the past, seeing that the hammer was malleable was a little bit hard because the hammer wasn't changing in front of you. But now we kind of live in a world where the technology we use so quickly changes that it reveals its malleability to us in that process. and maybe makes it a little bit more clear, actually, that we potentially have a stake in that unfolding. So in a certain respect, I don't want to say that new media will just take care of itself. That like it'll reveal its transparency to us and will take hold and will be great. That's not going to be the case. But I think there's something to be leveraged there about the new media landscape that we're living in that is showing youth hopefully something new and is promoting something new. But I think there are real decisions that we make about how that technology is formulated in terms of how it positions kids. I mean, I was really sad when MySpace really kind of went on the decline, because it was a space where kids were constantly doing a lot more tweaking. And I'm sure from the Mozilla folks, like people were really learning CSS and HTML on a pretty wide scale when MySpace was going on, and we don't really have that anymore. But I definitely want to hear some other people's perspectives on how do we kind of widen the opportunity set for people to develop these sorts of dispositions.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left, so maybe if there are a few in the Hangout who want to just add a few final sort of quick notes.
Sure. I think one connection that can easily be drawn is one of the previous connected learning presentations by Jeff Sturges, who has started a makerspace called Melt Elliott Makerspace. And instead of actually taking place in a school, it actually takes place in a community church. So it's really switching up of kind of what we think of when we talk about kind of hacker spaces. It's always kind of assumed to be a very kind of Anglo, well-to-do group of people, and I think we need to do kind of more of that kind of switching of kind of getting inside communities and working from communities on out.
Great example. Any other
thing which I've been sorry, I'm just I'm also on IRC with some other people from Mozilla, including Carla. Hello, Carla, and Jess, who are listening, and they've asked me to mention the fact that. Basically, when Mozilla, for example, we're not building a whole literacy ecosystem here. We're kind of helping to build part of it, and it's part of a wider ecosystem, and the community is helping us build it, and it's not kind of one thing to rule them all. So we're doing the world as we kind of see it, and we're helping other people come in to help build their world as well, and it's all going to kind of build this wonderful world of unicorns and rainbows. Didn't exactly say that last bit, but it was kind of that gist.
I would I'd follow Andrew and say that it is. I think it is really important where people have conversations like this, where we position our work and where we put ourselves. And I think that kind of transparency and invitation to participate by being active in all kinds of environments is really important. I think that's why so many organizations like the Hive are crucial in putting out maker, hacker literacies and opportunities for people to participate and to make the world around them. And I think what that means in schools has to be giving up on some of the stuff that's just done because it's done, and taking some things out of the special classes, the electives, the clubs, and just right there in the middle of the classroom sometime doing some of this work and letting people just watch, wonder, ask questions, even if they're not ready to just jump into it yet, making sure that it's all visible and open in the school, during the school day. I think it's just as important in terms of equity as providing opportunities outside of school for this stuff. And that's the change I'd really like to see in schools in the next 10, 25 years.
Yeah, I think that invitation to participate is probably, like, you nailed it. Like, that's probably the biggest thing to really see this take off, is like it can't be about any one particular way of doing things or a one sort of central body, but it's more about just a way for people to not only get involved but to hack it themselves, right? That's the nature of this all. Is like you can plant the seeds, but it's all about being able to make it their own as well. So.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, and unfortunately, as I say, all good things really do come to an end, I guess. And Rafi, thank you again so much for bringing this topic to Connected Learning TV, for the conversation. Those of you in the Hangout, your observations, your insights, expertise are greatly appreciated as well. Just a reminder to our listeners that you can go back and review this entire webinar on connectedlearning.tv later today. And there you'll find all of the questions that were asked, a list of resources that were mentioned, as well as an archive of the live stream chat as well. And we also welcome you to continue today's conversation on that page, as well as through the Twitter hashtag Connected Learning. And one final reminder, our next webinar is actually coming up in a couple of days, Thursday. And that will be August 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time with Connie Yao from the MacArthur Foundation. And she will be sharing with us just some of the ideas, sort of inspiration behind connected learning, and her thoughts about how we reimagine the experience of education in the digital age. Again, I'm Craig Watkins, moderating, guest hosting for Mimi Ito, and the DML Hub more broadly. Thank you again, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.